My phone buzzed while I was watering the flowers on my front porch. The message was from my daughter, Emily. "Dad, we'll need your house this weekend. Mark's parents are coming from Chicago." Before I could reply, another message appeared. "You can stay at a hotel. We'll cover one night." I stared at the screen. Not a question, not a request, a decision. And the most surprising part, Emily had already invited them before asking me. What she didn't know was that 3 days earlier, I had changed every lock in the house. And by Saturday afternoon, she would be standing outside my front door with 6 guests and nowhere to go to them. My name is Richard Bennett. I'm 68 years old, retired, and I live alone in a house just outside Portland, Oregon. It's not a fancy house. 3 bedrooms, a small front porch, a backyard with an old maple tree that shades half the lawn every summer. But it's mine. I spent 32 years paying for it. Every overtime shift, every missed vacation, every sacrifice. This house represents a lifetime of work. My daughter Emily has never really understood that. She grew up here. She learned to ride a bicycle on this street. She celebrated birthdays in this dining room. And somewhere along the way, she started acting as if the house belonged to her too. At first, it was little things. She would stop by without calling. She would tell friends they could park in my driveway. Once she even promised a neighbor they could use my backyard for a graduation party before asking me. Whenever I complained, she laughed. "Relax, Dad. It's not a big deal." For years, I let it go. Maybe because she was my only child. Maybe because I hated conflict. Or maybe because I kept hoping she would eventually realize that being family doesn't mean owning someone else's life. Unfortunately, she learned the opposite lesson. The problem started on a Thursday afternoon. I was sitting on my porch drinking iced tea when my phone buzzed. The message was from Emily. "Dad, we'll need your house this weekend." I stared at the screen. Need? Not borrow. Not use. Need. Before I could reply, another text arrived. "Mark's parents are visiting from Chicago." Then another. "You can stay at a hotel for a couple days." I actually laughed. Not because it was funny, because it was so unbelievable. I read the messages again. No question, no request, just instructions. Like I was an employee being informed of a schedule change. I typed back, "I'm not available this weekend." A few minutes later her response arrived. "That's okay. I still have the spare key." I felt something cold settle in my stomach. Because suddenly I understood. Emily wasn't asking permission. She had already made plans. Plans that included my house. Without me. Again. The truth is, this wasn't the first time. About 2 weeks earlier, I had come home from a fishing trip and found complete strangers in my backyard. 3 adults. 2 children. A barbecue grill. Music playing. At first I thought they had the wrong address. Then one woman smiled and waved. "Oh, hi." I looked around. "Can I help you?" She seemed confused. "We're friends of Emily." That explained everything. Apparently Emily had told them they could use my yard for an afternoon gathering. Without telling me. Without asking, without even mentioning it afterward. When I confronted her later, she acted annoyed. "Dad, they only stayed a few hours." "That's not the point. They cleaned up." "That's not the point either." She rolled her eyes. Sometimes I wondered if she even heard the words coming out of my mouth. A few days after that incident, I made a decision. I called a locksmith. The man arrived on a Tuesday morning. Friendly, professional, fast. He installed a new smart deadbolt and keypad system. When he finished, he handed me the phone app instructions. "The old key won't open the deadbolt anymore." "Good," I replied. He smiled politely. "You've had problems?" Something like that. I didn't explain further. Some conversations aren't worth having, especially when you've already spent years repeating yourself. The spare key Emily had still worked on the lower handle, but the house couldn't be opened unless the deadbolt unlocked electronically. I never told her. I didn't think I needed to. After all, responsible adults usually ask before entering someone else's home. At least that's what I believed. Apparently Emily had different standards. Friday evening arrived. No more messages. No phone calls. Nothing. That silence worried me more than an argument would have, because it meant she still believed everything was going according to plan. Saturday morning I drove downtown to meet an old friend named Frank. We had breakfast together once every month. Same diner, same booth, same complaints about getting older. By noon we were still talking when my phone vibrated. A motion alert from the front door camera. I opened the app, and there they were. Emily, her husband Mark, Mark's parents, Mark's younger sister, 2 children, and enough luggage for a week-long vacation. I counted 6 suitcases. My heart sank, not because they were there, because they genuinely expected the door to open. Emily reached into her purse, pulled out the spare key, and smiled confidently. The key turned. The handle moved. The door stayed closed. For a moment nobody reacted. Then she tried again. Nothing. Mark leaned closer. Maybe the lock stuck. Emily laughed. Yeah, that's probably it. She tried again. Harder. Still nothing. On my phone screen, I could actually see confusion beginning to spread across her face. And for the first time all weekend, I simply watched. For several minutes, nobody moved. Emily kept trying the key. The result never changed. The handle turned. The deadbolt stayed locked. Mark looked increasingly uncomfortable. His parents stood behind him beside the luggage. One of the children had already sat down on the porch steps. Are you sure your dad knows we're coming? Mark's mother finally asked. Emily forced a smile. Of course. Then why isn't he answering? Emily didn't respond. Instead, she tried the key again. I sat quietly in the diner, watching through my phone. Frank looked over. Everything okay? I turned the screen toward him. He watched for a few seconds. Then he whistled softly. That's awkward. You have no idea. Back at the house, Mark walked around the porch. Maybe we should call him. Emily shook her head. He's probably driving. Driving where? Emily hesitated. Then she answered. I don't know. The silence that followed was painful, because everyone could tell she didn't know either. Mark's father folded his arms. I thought you said the house was available. It is. It doesn't seem available. Emily's smile disappeared. She hated being questioned, especially in front of other people. I knew that look. I'd seen it since she was 12 years old. Whenever reality refused to cooperate with her plans. 10 minutes later, another problem appeared. My neighbor, Mrs. Reynolds. She was 73 and noticed everything. Absolutely everything. She stepped outside carrying a watering can. Then she spotted the crowd, the suitcases, the children, the repeated attempts to open my door. What happened? She asked. Emily smiled nervously. The lock isn't working. Mrs. Reynolds looked directly at the deadbolt camera, then back at Emily. Richard usually answers his phone. Emily's face tightened. We'll figure it out. Mrs. Reynolds nodded slowly, but I could tell she wasn't convinced. She returned to her house. A minute later her curtains moved. She was definitely watching. By then, nearly half an hour had passed. The mood was changing. People who arrive expecting a vacation don't enjoy standing outside in the heat. The children were getting restless. Mark's mother looked annoyed. Mark's father looked exhausted. Mark himself looked embarrassed. Emily looked angry. And anger was replacing confidence. Finally Mark spoke. Emily, what? Did you actually ask your father? The question landed like a brick. Emily immediately became defensive. Why does everyone keep asking me that? Because we're standing outside. I told you he wouldn't mind. That's not what I asked. Emily crossed her arms. Mark sighed. For the first time, I could see him beginning to understand exactly what had happened. Not a misunderstanding. Not a broken lock. A promise she had no authority to make. A few minutes later my phone buzzed again. This time it was a text. From Emily. Dad, call me. I didn't. Another message arrived. The lock isn't working. Still nothing from me. Then another. Where are you? I placed the phone face down on the table. Frank raised an eyebrow. You gonna answer? No. You sound pretty sure. I've spent 20 years answering. He nodded. That was all he needed to hear. Back at the house, things continued unraveling. Mark's father finally sat on one of the suitcases. His patience had clearly reached its limit. We drove 3 hours for this. Nobody replied. A child started crying. Mark's mother checked nearby hotels on her phone. Mark stared at the ground. Emily paced back and forth. And then she did something that didn't surprise me at all. She looked for someone else to blame. This wouldn't be happening if Dad answered his phone. Mark looked at her. No. She stopped walking. What do you mean no? He wouldn't have to answer if you'd asked first. The porch became very quiet. Even through the camera microphone, I could hear the tension. Emily stared at him. Mark stared back. For perhaps the first time in their marriage, he wasn't helping her defend a bad decision. He was simply telling the truth. Emily hated that. A few minutes later my family group chat exploded. Emily had posted a message. Dad locked us out and won't answer. Replies started appearing immediately. What happened? Why? Where is Richard? Are the kids okay? I watched the messages arrive one after another. Then I opened the camera screenshots I had saved. One image showed 6 people standing outside my house with luggage. Another showed Emily repeatedly trying to force the door. I uploaded both pictures. Then I typed a single sentence. I was never asked for permission. The group chat went silent. Completely silent. For nearly a full minute. Then my younger brother replied. You mean they just showed up? Yes. Another relative responded. Without asking. Yes. Nobody defended Emily. Nobody. Because the photos removed all doubt. Suddenly this wasn't a story about a father refusing to help. It was a story about a daughter treating someone else's home like a hotel reservation. And everyone could see it. Back on the porch, Emily's phone buzzed repeatedly. She read the messages. Her expression changed. The confidence was gone now. The story she'd been telling was falling apart. And she knew it. But the worst moment was still coming. Because at that exact moment, a white SUV pulled into my driveway. And Emily's face immediately lit up. For one hopeful second, she thought it was me. It wasn't. It was someone much worse. Someone who had every legal right to be there. The property management officer I had called earlier. And he wasn't coming to unlock the door. The white SUV rolled slowly into the driveway. Emily straightened immediately. For a brief second, hope flashed across her face. She probably thought I had finally come home. Maybe she thought everything would somehow work out. Maybe she thought I would unlock the door and pretend none of this had happened. Instead, the driver's door opened and a man stepped out wearing a property management badge. His name was Kevin. I knew him well. He occasionally helped homeowners in our neighborhood with security issues and property concerns. Kevin walked calmly toward the porch. Emily met him halfway. Perfect, she said quickly. The lock isn't working. Kevin glanced at the door, then at the luggage, then at the 6 people standing around my house. Finally, he looked back at Emily. The homeowner contacted us. The smile disappeared from her face. What? The homeowner contacted us. He repeated the sentence slowly. He's informed us that nobody has permission to enter the property. For a moment nobody spoke. Mark lowered his eyes. His parents exchanged an uncomfortable glance. Emily stared at Kevin. That's ridiculous. I'm simply relaying the owner's instructions. This is my father's house. Kevin nodded politely. And your father has made his wishes very clear. The silence felt enormous. Mark's father finally stood up from the suitcase. So we aren't staying here. Kevin answered before anyone else could. No, sir. That was it. One sentence. One simple sentence. And the entire fantasy collapsed. All weekend Emily had believed reality would eventually bend to her plan. Instead, reality had just slammed the door in her face. Literally. Mark rubbed his forehead. We need a hotel. Nobody argued. Nobody protested. Nobody suggested trying the key again. Because everyone finally understood. The problem wasn't the lock. The problem was permission. And permission had never existed. Kevin waited patiently while the family gathered their bags. The children looked tired. Mark looked defeated. His parents looked frustrated. But Emily looked something else. Humiliated. Not because the door stayed locked. Because witnesses were present. The people she had promised comfort and convenience now knew the truth. She had offered something that wasn't hers. As they loaded luggage back into their vehicles, my phone rang. Emily. Again. I watched it ring. Then stop. Then ring again. Then stop. For years I had explained boundaries. For years I had repeated the same lessons. For years she had ignored them. Nothing I could say over the phone would suddenly fix that. Actions had finally said what words never could. I didn't answer. A few minutes later, another notification appeared. Voicemail, then another, and another. I didn't listen. Not yet. Back at the house, everyone was preparing to leave. Then something unexpected happened. Mark stopped beside the porch steps. He looked at Emily. Not angrily, not loudly, just honestly. Your dad was right. Emily froze. What? You should have asked. The words were simple. But they hit harder than any argument, because they came from the one person who had spent years defending her. Mark continued. This never should have happened. Emily looked away. For once, she had no response. No excuse. No explanation. No one else spoke either. Because there wasn't anything left to say. The truth was standing there in plain sight. After a few moments, Mark picked up another suitcase and walked toward the car. His parents followed. The children climbed into the back seat. One by one, everyone left, until Emily stood alone in the driveway. The camera captured her looking at the house. The same house where she had celebrated birthdays, opened Christmas presents, run through sprinklers in the summer. The same house that had always welcomed her. The difference was simple. A welcome is a gift. It is not ownership. She stood there for another minute. Then she finally walked away. The camera notification disappeared. The driveway became empty. And for the first time all weekend, everything was quiet. That evening I returned home. The sun was beginning to set. Orange light stretched across the yard. The old maple tree swayed gently in the wind. Everything looked exactly the same. Yet somehow it felt different, lighter. I unlocked the door and stepped inside. No damage, no mess. No strangers, just peace. I set my keys on the kitchen counter and sat down at the dining room table. For several minutes I simply enjoyed the silence. Then I opened the lock application. I deleted every old access setting, changed every security code, updated every emergency contact. Not because I hated my daughter, because I respected myself. There is a difference. A very important difference. Later that night, curiosity finally got the better of me. I listened to Emily's voicemail. Her voice sounded strained. "Dad, please call me." The second message was shorter. "This didn't have to happen." The third was almost a whisper. "I didn't think you'd actually say no." I replayed that last sentence. Then I set the phone down. Because that was the entire problem. She never thought I would say no. For years I had been protecting her from disappointment. Without realizing it, I had also protected her from consequences. This time was different. The next morning I received a text. Not an apology, not exactly, but closer than anything she had sent before. I should have asked first. I stared at the message. Then I replied. "Yes. You should have. Nothing more, nothing less." A few days later, Emily asked if we could meet for coffee. We did. The conversation wasn't perfect. There were awkward moments, defensive moments, emotional moments. But for the first time in years, it was honest. She admitted she had assumed access to the house. I admitted I should have stopped enabling that assumption years earlier. Neither of us enjoyed the conversation, which probably meant it was overdue. When we finally stood to leave, Emily hugged me. A real hug, not one given out of obligation. Before she walked away, she said something I hadn't expected. "I'm sorry, Dad." 3 words. Simple. Late, but sincere. I nodded. "Thank you." And that was enough. Because sometimes the strongest boundary isn't a locked door. It's finally teaching people that love and access are not the same thing. You can love someone deeply, and still refuse to let them walk over you. That weekend wasn't really about a house. It was about respect. And respect begins the moment people learn that your kindness is not an unlimited resource. If you were in my position, would you have unlocked the door for your daughter? Or would you have done exactly the same thing? Let me know in the comments.